The dark truth about helping the weak, Nietzsche. Strong people who constantly help the weak are actually harming them. This isn't about being cruel. It's about understanding human nature. Nietzsche recognized that when we rush to assist those who struggle, we rob them of their chance to develop strength. Think about how diamonds are formed, through intense pressure. Without resistance, muscles don't grow. Without challenges, minds don't expand. Every time you solve someone's problems, you're stealing their opportunity to solve them themselves. I've seen this in my own life. The moments that shaked me most weren't when others rescued me, but when they stepped back and let me figure things out. This is why helicopter parents often raise dependent children. This is why welfare systems, when poorly designed, can trap people in poverty cycles. The truly compassionate thing isn't to carry someone's burden. It's to believe in their capacity to carry it themselves. Next time someone's struggling, instead of jumping in to help, ask yourself, am I helping them grow or just helping them stay weak? Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is step back and let people face their own dragons. Because in the end, strength isn't given, it's earned through struggle. Nietzsche's warning against misguided help. Nietzsche's critique of modern morality centers on the consequences of misplaced compassion. On the genealogy of morality, he distinguishes between what he calls master morality and slave morality. The former, according to Nietzsche, arises from the strong, those who affirm life, power, and excellence. The latter, however, emerges from the weak, those who resent the strong and construct a moral system that glorifies meekness, humility, and suffering. Helping the weak, in Nietzsche's view, becomes dangerous when it reinforces slave morality. When society elevates weakness as virtue and condemns strength as cruelty, it not only fails to uplift the weak, but also stifles the strong. Over time, this results in a culture where excellence is viewed with suspicion and mediocrity is celebrated. But Nietzsche isn't advocating for the abandonment of all support or empathy. He is challenging us to reconsider why we help others. Are we helping out of genuine respect for the other's potential? Or are we helping out of guilt, pity, or a need to feel superior? Nietzsche despised pity. He considered it a sentiment that lowers both the giver and the receiver. Pity assumes the other is incapable, that they need you, and that their suffering defines them. This, he believed, undermines their dignity. The psychology of resentment. Central to Nietzsche's warning is the psychological state of resentment, a deep-seated resentment that the weak often feel toward the strong. Resentment doesn't simply envy the success of others. It morally condemns it. According to Nietzsche, when the weak cannot defeat the strong through force, they redefine the game entirely. Strength becomes evil. Suffering becomes virtue. Power is no longer admirable, but oppressive. This inversion of values can be seen in many well-meaning institutions today. Welfare programs, for instance, often start as necessary measures to address systemic inequality. But without careful design and a long-term vision for empowerment, they can become mechanisms that reinforce dependency. When a system supports people because they are weak rather than helping them become strong, it perpetuates weakness as an identity. In Nietzschean terms, this is not compassion. It is cruelty masquerading as kindness. To continually affirm someone's victimhood is to chain them to it. Growth through struggle. Nietzsche's emphasis on struggle is not a call for harshness for its own sake. Rather, it's a recognition of the truth that growth requires resistance. What does not kill me makes me stronger, he famously wrote in Twilight of the Idols. Like a blacksmith forging a blade, it is through the hammering of experience, the heat, the pressure, the trial, that human beings find their strength. Consider how we treat children. Overprotective parenting, while rooted in love, often denies children the experiences necessary for developing confidence and resilience. When every obstacle is cleared from a child's path, they never learn how to navigate complexity or cope with failure. The result? Adults who are anxious, uncertain, and reliant on others for validation. In Nietzsche's framework, such overprotection is a form of spiritual suffocation. It denies the child the chance to cultivate what he called the will to power, not a desire to dominate others, but a deep internal drive to overcome obstacles and grow stronger. The noble soul and the will to power. Nietzsche's ideal is the noble soul, someone who does not seek pity, but embraces the struggle of life as an opportunity for growth. The noble soul does not demand equality of outcome, nor does he envy those with greater power. Instead, he strives for self-overcoming, for becoming who he is meant to be. This process is not easy. It involves suffering, sacrifice, and solitude. But here lies the paradox. It is precisely through suffering that meaning is born. Nietzsche admired figures like the Greek tragic heroes or Jesus, not as a religious figure, but as a symbol of existential defiance. These are individuals who suffered nobly, who bore their burdens without collapsing into victimhood. To help someone become a noble soul is not to shield them from pain. It is to walk beside them without removing the weight of their burden. This is a radical form of respect. It means believing in their potential, even when they do not. It means allowing them to fail, because failure is part of becoming. The shadow side of altruism. Let us now examine the motivations behind our desire to help. Altruism is often seen as the highest moral virtue. But Nietzsche invites us to scrutinize this further. Is our altruism truly selfless? Or is it a disguised form of egoism, a way to feel morally superior, to gain social approval, or to avoid confronting our own suffering? There is a kind of helping that is not about empowering others, but about protecting our own sense of goodness. This form of altruism is ultimately selfish. It keeps the other in a state of dependence, so we can continue to feel useful. Nietzsche would argue that this is not love. It is domination in disguise. True love, in his view, does not seek to possess or fix the other. It seeks to call forth their highest potential. So, next time you're tempted to help, ask yourself, am I doing this because I respect their strength, or because I'm afraid to witness their pain? Am I giving them tools, or just taking away their opportunity to build their own? Society and the cult of victimhood. In contemporary culture, there is a growing emphasis on victimhood as identity. Social recognition often flows not to those who overcome, but to those who suffer visibly. In such an environment, the incentive structure shifts. Rather than striving for excellence, individuals are rewarded for highlighting their wounds. This creates what some philosophers and psychologists call the culture of grievance. It is a society where personal agency is minimized, and the highest moral currency is suffering. Nietzsche would see this as a manifestation of slave morality in its most insidious form. To resist this trend is not to dismiss suffering. Suffering is real, and injustice exists. But Nietzsche's challenge is to transform suffering into strength, not into a permanent badge of identity. As Viktor Frankl later wrote, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Beyond Nietzsche, a critical perspective. But Nietzsche's position, though powerful, is not unassailable. Critics of Nietzschean ethics might argue that his emphasis on strength and self-overcoming can easily slide into elitism or disregard for structural injustice. After all, not everyone starts life on equal footing. Trauma, systemic oppression, and inherited disadvantages can make self-overcoming far more difficult for some than others. From a more communitarian or egalitarian perspective, helping the weak is not about pity, it is about solidarity. It is a recognition that human beings are interdependent and that we all need support at different stages of life. In this view, strength is not diminished by compassion, it is enriched by it. Philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas or Martin Buber would critique Nietzsche's dismissal of pity. For them, ethics begins not in power, but in responsibility for the other. The face of the suffering person calls me to respond, not to dominate, but to serve. A middle path. Empowerment versus enabling. So, how do we reconcile Nietzsche's insight with a humane society? The key lies in distinguishing empowerment from enabling. Empowerment affirms the other's agency. It provides tools, encouragement, and challenge. Enabling, by contrast, removes the need for struggle and thereby removes the potential for growth. Helping someone doesn't mean solving their problems for them. It means standing beside them, offering guidance if asked, but ultimately allowing them to walk their own path. It is the difference between lifting someone up and carrying them indefinitely. Nietzsche's dark truth is not that helping the weak is inherently wrong, but that when it becomes a habit of mind, a moral ideal, or a political strategy, it risks turning people into perpetual dependence. Worse, it risks turning helpers into quiet tyrants, addicted to the feeling of being needed. The hard love of letting go. In a world that often equates compassion with intervention, Nietzsche offers a hard, unsettling truth. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is step back, to allow others to fall, to watch them struggle, to resist the urge to fix. This is not easy. It feels cruel. It feels unnatural. But consider this. When you look back on your own life, when did you grow the most? When you were rescued, or when you had no choice but to rise? Strength, like wisdom, is not transferable. It must be earned through suffering, failure, and relentless effort. To deny someone their struggle is to deny them their becoming. As Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, you say your soul is selfless. But I tell you, your soul itself wants to be the self of another. Pity is the final revenge of the weak against the strong. The next time you see someone stumbling, don't rush in. Watch, wait, hold your empathy like a blade. Sharp, discerning, not dull with sentimentality. Ask yourself, am I helping them become stronger or just keeping them comfortable in their weakness? The dark truth is that love, real love, is often not soft. It is fierce. It demands that we believe in the other's strength more than they believe in it themselves. And sometimes, it demands that we walk away, not out of indifference, but out of faith. Nietzsche applied real-world lessons from a dark truth. Parenting. Raising lions, not lambs. Modern parenting often operates under the principle of shielding children from pain. While this instinct is rooted in love, Nietzsche would argue that it can result in the opposite of what we intend. When parents smooth out every difficulty, mediate every conflict, and micromanage every detail of a child's life, they are not preparing them for reality. They are setting them up for fragility. Nietzsche would call instead for what we might term philosophical parenting. That is, raising children not to be safe, but to be strong, to be courageous, resilient, and willing to face difficulty head-on. This means allowing them to fail. It means resisting the urge to rescue them from the consequences of their actions. It means letting them experience boredom, rejection, and challenge, and trusting that these are the very things that will shape their character. The goal is not to make life easy, but to make the child capable of handling a hard life. Parents often ask, what if my child suffers? The better question is, what if my child never learns how to suffer well? As Nietzsche wrote, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Teaching children to find that why, purpose, meaning, inner strength, is infinitely more valuable than giving them comfort. Leadership. Leading with respect, not control. In the realm of leadership, whether in business, politics, or community, Nietzsche's perspective offers a powerful challenge. Do you lead to serve, or do you lead to control? Leaders who constantly solve problems for their teams may be well-intentioned, but they often foster dependency and stifle initiative. A Nietzschean leader, by contrast, understands that greatness comes not from micromanaging, but from empowering others to grow through responsibility. The best leaders are those who create conditions for others to struggle productively, who set high expectations, give honest feedback, and step back enough to let others take ownership. They respect the potential in others enough to let them face failure. Nietzsche might say, do not lead people away from fire. Lead them through it. To lead this way takes courage. It means being willing to disappoint people in the short term in order to strengthen them in the long term. It means prioritizing truth over comfort, growth over popularity. This kind of leadership doesn't look heroic in the traditional sense, but it creates heroes out of others. Education. Teaching the will to power. In education, too, we often equate help with effectiveness. Teachers are pressured to ensure success, often by lowering standards, inflating grades, or removing challenges. But Nietzsche would remind us that the mind, like the body, grows through effort. A Nietzschean approach to education sees the classroom not as a sanctuary from difficulty, but as a training ground for struggle. It focuses not just on delivering information, but on cultivating inner strength, the courage to question, to think independently, to wrestle with ambiguity. Good teachers don't just give answers. They provoke deeper questions. They challenge students to move beyond superficial opinions and comfortable dogmas. They are more like philosophical midwives, helping students give birth to their own ideas, their own strength of mind. Nietzsche valued Bildung, a German term that roughly translates to self-cultivation. True education, for him, was about forming the soul, not just filling the brain. It was a spiritual task. As educators, formal or informal, we must ask, are we teaching students to conform or to become? Are we equipping them with formulas, or are we guiding them toward wisdom? Relationships, loving without possessing. Nietzsche also speaks deeply to the nature of personal relationships. Romantic or platonic, relationships can often become entangled with control, pity, or a desire to fix the other. Nietzsche would warn that this kind of love is not real love. It is veiled domination. True love, he might say, does not seek to make the other dependent on you. It seeks to call them forth into their own strength, even if that means they outgrow you. It is not about completing the other, but about witnessing and encouraging their becoming. This is a much harder form of love. It requires ego death. It means not rescuing your partner from their demons, but walking beside them as they face them. It means not demanding they stay the same, but encouraging their transformation. Nietzsche once wrote, "Marriage, that I call the will of two to create the one who is more than those who created it." In other words, love is not about comfort or even compatibility. It is about creation. The kind of love Nietzsche envisions is a forge. It burns, it purifies, it remakes both people into something greater. To love this way is to embrace risk, but it is also to embrace freedom, both your own and the others. Social justice and Nietzsche's warning. One of the most contentious applications of Nietzsche's thinking lies in the sphere of social justice. In an age rightfully concerned with equity and inclusion, Nietzsche's critique of pity and resentment can sound harsh, even dangerous. But perhaps what Nietzsche feared was not justice itself, but how it is pursued. If social justice becomes focused on cultivating victim identity, on moralizing weakness, or on silencing excellence, then it becomes what Nietzsche would call decadent, life-denying rather than life-affirming. A Nietzschean vision of justice would focus less on punishing the strong and more on awakening the strength of the oppressed. It would fight not for comfort, but for capacity. It would not celebrate pain, but channel it into power. This is not about abandoning compassion. It is about redefining it, not as the soothing of wounds, but as the ignition of will. Final reflection. Beyond good and evil, toward greatness. Nietzsche's message is deeply countercultural. In a society addicted to comfort, safety, and instant gratification, he reminds us that the path to greatness is hard. It requires suffering. It demands solitude. It is forged in the crucible of resistance. Helping the weak, then, is not wrong, but we must help them grow, not keep them small. We must believe in their capacity for transformation, even when they don't believe in it themselves. This requires discernment. It requires us to check our motivations. Are we helping out of fear, guilt, or a desire for moral status? Or are we helping in a way that respects the other's agency? As Nietzsche would say, become who you are. But to become who you are, you must be allowed to struggle. And so must others. Sometimes, the deepest act of love is not in extending your hand, but in withholding it, and watching someone rise. Let them rise. And so we return to the heart of Nietzsche's challenge, to love others not by shielding them from pain, but by trusting in their capacity to transcend it. True strength is not found in avoiding struggle, but in confronting it with courage and clarity. In a world quick to comfort and slow to confront, we must dare to believe that the highest form of compassion is not to carry others, but to walk beside them, unwavering, respectful, and quietly fierce. Let them rise, not because we lifted them, but because we refuse to let them forget they could.